This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter for MacVoices viewers and listeners. Visit MacVoices.com, look for the blue box in our sidebar, and subscribe. Welcome to the MacJury on MacVoices. This is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have an all-star panel today to talk about Apple's announcements on October 22nd, which as we record this is today. So we're just going to dig right in and get to it. First up, we haven't seen him for a little while because he was flooded out, but I think he's now unflooded. Mr. Jeff Gamet. Jeff, it's great to have you back.
It's nice to be back, and yes, I am unflooded now. And by unflooded, I mean I moved someplace where there's not a flood.
That's good.
An undisclosed location.
That's right. Yeah. The TMO Central Towers have been relocated to Boulder, Colorado.
I see.
That's good. That's good. So just give us a quick briefing on who you are and what you do for those people who, the one person there that's been on a desert island that doesn't know.
Okay, so for the one of you that's on a desert island, first, I'm glad you finally have internet access on your desert island. And I'm Jeff Gamet, the managing editor for Mac Observer. And you can find me on all kinds of podcasts all around the internet and at Fresh Brewed Tales, where I talk about coffee shops. Google me now that you have internet.
Great. It's good to have you back. Next up, Mr. Mark Fuccio, who you should know if you watch this show at all. But if you don't, Mark, it's good to see you again as always.
Hello, Chuck. It's good to join you and the rest of your guests. It was an interesting day today. We'll get into that in a moment. Many of you probably know my voice and are starting to see my face as Chuck does more video podcast shows. I live in Silicon Valley. I've done a lot of work with a lot of startups, helping them target and enter and develop markets. Probably one of my most recent successful one was a company called Drobo, which has been talked about a lot on this show. I'm working with a lot of other storage companies, both at consumer level and then high-end enterprise level storage stuff. So it's always an exciting world, but the storage for creative pros and individuals is way more fun than stuff up in the server closet.
There's a joke about getting out of the closet, but we're going to leave it alone. And the last but not least, the man whose name, face, and voice that everybody here recognizes, Mr. Ted Landau.
Hi. And yes, I do the Bugs and Fixes column for Macworld magazine, where I'm a senior contributor, and I've done other things too, but that's good enough for now.
Did you fix the hinge on that door in the kitchen yet, Ted?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. I missed it. Obviously,
you said you do other things, so I was.
I see.
Hoping you may have gotten to that.
Yes, I'm available as a sort of handyman that around the neighborhood and that sort of thing. Exactly.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, there's so many Apple announcements here. We only have about an hour, and instead of just going through and reciting everything, there are going to be plenty of places that the folks can get that. I guess let's take a little higher level and figure out what this all means. And the first question I want to ask of this group is, as exciting as today was it a good idea to refresh almost the entire product line at once?
Why not?
Yeah, Apple did it last year.
Yeah,
and it worked out okay.
It puts a little strain on some of our budgets, doesn't it? Or
I don't think Apple is concerned that you might spend too much money. That's not a priority of theirs.
Well, I seriously, I just wondered, because I know I was salivating over everything, and I think everybody is. But is it a good idea not to space it out a little bit and maybe, okay, this month I'll go for a new iPad. Next month maybe I can justify a MacBook Pro, and then the next month we do something else.
I think it's fine. I think it's interesting what Apple didn't do a little bit, and in terms of what they didn't announce, there are no new iPods, which was pretty much expected because they had updated the colors of the iPods a few weeks ago. But this is the first year since the iPod came out, I believe, that Apple has not refreshed the iPod line in any way whatsoever, other than that minor color change. So that's kind of interesting. It's also interesting that they chose to update the iMacs a few weeks ago with upgrades that are comparable, really, to what they did with the MacBook Pro updates. They're not that substantially different, yet they give the iMac no love at all. I mean, they didn't mention that they upgraded the iMacs online really at the time. I mean, you could get the new ones in the store, but there was no PR really. I think there was a press release, but the iMac website didn't indicate that they were new iMacs, and they didn't mention it at all today. And so for some reason, Apple wants you to ignore the fact that they're updating their iMacs. And the other thing that they didn't announce was that they dropped, the older Mac Pro is no longer available, not a surprise because the new one's coming online. And the 15-inch MacBook Pro without the Retina display is no longer available, which means there's only one Mac that you can buy now that still has an optical drive, and that's the 13-inch MacBook Pro. So they didn't do everything.
So we've often been described as being in a post-PC world. Jeff, is maybe we haven't made the whole trip to post-PC, but have we made a huge conversion to mobile computing for anything except the big iron?
I think before today's announcements, the iPad was already at a level for a lot of people where it would totally work as their primary computer. Not everyone, but for a lot of people. And by bumping it across the board up to 64-bit processors and cutting down the weight on the full-size iPad, that Apple is making the iPad lineup more enticing as an alternative to a traditional computer. So, yeah, I think for a lot of people that they'll be able to get by with just an iPad now.
You think the next step up, the next logical step then would be a MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and the iMacs really are not, I guess, relevant or important at this point?
Actually, I'd say for someone that's looking at the iPad as their primary computer, if they found that they needed something more, they would probably be better served by going to an iMac, because then they have their full-on desk computer, and the iPad is their mobile computer, whereas before it would be a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro.
Okay. Mark, you're the guy that interfaces more than any of us here with the enterprise. Any thoughts on today's announcement and how it relates to those folks?
Well, yeah, it's very interesting in sort of a very Apple-esque way. They're making products that individuals will buy and bring into the enterprise, while simultaneously basically sort of thumbing their nose at traditional, enterprise IT buying behavior. I think they've been very successful in doing that. They've obviously have a good close partnership with Microsoft, as measured by the Exchange integration and calendar integration, on iOS devices. There's still a little friendly competition in the tablet space, and we can talk about that in a little bit, because Microsoft also today introduced and updated their tablets, and in true Redmond fashion, they changed some of the names, so it's confusing as all get out. But they're just continuing to try to hack away. I would like to comment on something Ted said about the update to the iMac. I think from Apple's perspective, Apple never really talks about specs. They do sometimes at announcements like today, just to really, wow, this is the fastest ever. It's 42 times faster than something 3 generations ago. But other than that, they really don't dwell on processor speeds or other things. I think that's things that users like to look at. And really, I believe that for many of these devices, there's more than enough computing power for probably 90 or 95% of the market. So that's why there's more of a focus, it seems, on price and things like colors for some of the iPhones than there is on the raw native horsepower. The products have become good enough for many different applications. So there are different factors involved in purchase decisions, both at individual level as well as people thinking about which one should I use and get, and think about for my particular job, whether it's software development or putting audio and video keynote presentations together.
I was just going to add in terms of what you and Jeff were talking about whether an iPad is now sufficient for getting work done. And that could be a longer discussion in general. But the one thing I want to mention is I was intrigued by the new name, iPad Air. And it seemed to come out of nowhere. There's no a priori reason that I can imagine it couldn't be called the new iPad or the iPad 5 or whatever. I'm thinking, why suddenly shift to an iPad Air, and what does wasn't it, why, how is it different from how it was before? It was just as much of an iPad Air before as it is now, and so the only thing that comes to mind for me, and admittedly this is just gut speculation, I could be completely wrong, is that Apple has another iPad coming out next year that they're going to call the iPad Pro. So it will mimic the MacBook Air and MacBook Pro. And for people that want to use an iPad as a replacement for a MacBook, I think that's going to be the biggest one to look at.
I think you're right, Ted. And I also think the naming is confusing, because when you look at Apple's laptop lineup right now, we have the MacBook Pro, which is the top of the line. We have the MacBook Air. So what is Apple's top of the line iPad now called? The iPad Air. And so, assuming Apple does release an iPad Pro next year, great. Now the naming fits. But until then, it's confusing, because they're using Air to designate the top of the line product in one of their lineups, and the mid-range product in their other lineup.
Oh, I agree, and I think not only am I agreeing with the general direction, but I think we're going to see it pretty soon, like next spring. I don't think they're going to wait till next fall to come out with an iPad Pro, which is probably why they're letting it go at this rate with the odd naming that you're talking about, because it's not going to stay that way for that long.
Right. Independent of timing, I agree with both of you. I think that names are very important, and it takes time for them to sink in. And the fact that they're changing the name now sort of clears the runway for a new product in the future. I do think that actually they have sort of 4 models. I think they have one too many. I'm very curious of why they don't just kill the iPad 2. Because it seems like it's a little more expensive than the iPad Mini, and I don't think it has as good a battery life. Certainly is heavier. It costs more. So that just seems like a crazy vestigial remnant in their product line.
Yeah, and then it's also now, I believe, the only Apple product, iOS Apple product you can buy that doesn't have a Lightning connector.
Did they add a Lightning connector to the iPhone 4S? I don't remember.
You can still get the 4S. Okay, but you
it's one of 2.
I think, yeah. So I was thinking the iPad 5. I mean, the iPhone 5 is a step down from the iPhone 5S, and they both have Lightning connectors. So
that's true. But, even the iPod Touch has Lightning.
That's right. So really, I mean, they're keeping this several-year-old iPad as the step down from the iPad Air, and it's not clear to me why they couldn't keep a newer version of the iPad. Maybe they want to have the lower version not have a Retina display. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. But aside from that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I can't imagine who's going to buy one.
It does, though, it puts an iPad in the price category. And I haven't looked all this up, but with the Kindle Fire, doesn't it? Or is the Kindle Fire a little cheaper than that?
Kindle's still cheaper.
Still cheaper, but it's still it's an iPad, and so you're going to pay a premium.
But the iPad 2, 16 gigabytes is $399. The iPad Mini is $299. That's why I think this is sort of crazy thinking.
Isn't the new? I have to check. I thought the iPad 2 is now $299. That's not the case.
No, I have a snapshot of their website right open on my screen. It's the iPad Mini with Wi-Fi that starts at $299.
No, that's ridiculous. I mean, about the iPad 2, that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we seem to be focusing on iPads, so that's great. Let's go with it. We have the A7 chip. We have the M7 chip. What we have the new camera with the bigger, better megapixels. What didn't show up was the touch sensor, which, frankly, I was quite surprised at. Is that, you think, in preparation for the now speculated iPad Pro?
I have a theory on that, and it took me a while to sort it out this afternoon, but I finally got there. Okay, so what we don't have today is third-party support for Touch ID. What I'm now wondering is if Apple is going to roll that out as part of iOS 8. So next spring at WWDC, developers start to get to play with Touch ID, and then in the fall they roll out iOS 8, and Touch ID is available across the board, and then new iPads come out with the Touch ID sensor. So until they're actually supporting it on third-party apps, I'm now questioning whether or not we will see Touch ID on iPads.
And also, it may be what you're saying, Chuck, that they may want to reserve Touch ID for their top of the line. And again, if we anticipate that an iPad Pro is going to be their top of the line model, then that's the one that'll have Touch ID, and the iPad Air won't. And if they put it on the iPad Air now, then they're not going to take it away later. So it's, again, could be a setup for what's to come.
Right. I think there's probably multiple factors that are interacting. I agree with Jeff's analysis that I think it's in their future. I would also bet on 2014 at WWDC that they open up APIs for third-party developers to use that. Could be wrong. It might be delayed a year after that. But I think that there's clearly a lot of interest and pressure in that direction. I also think maybe for the iPod Air, maybe they just it's a question of cost and margin, and again, because there's no really broad third-party use for it, they just left it out, as a way to trim some of the product's build costs. If you want to be a conspiracy theorist about it, you could clearly see that they're coming up with higher capacity models that they could announce next spring, summer, or fall. Whatever this iPad Pro hypothetical product, something with even more capacity, and certainly all the performance, the speed of the A7 seems such that developers could work just natively on the iPad device and do away with having to cross-compile from a Mac over to the iOS machine.
The other thing I'll comment on that is there was speculation before this event on a number of websites that Apple might be coming out with a larger iPad, like a 12 or 13-inch iPad, and that further that it might be some sort of iPad MacBook hybrid, where you could detach the display from the keyboard, say, and have it be an iPad, and when you put it back on the display, it's the display for a MacBook or something like that. I think Tim Cook pretty much said that isn't what's going to happen at the start of the talk when he said some companies are trying to turn laptops into tablets and tablets into laptops. That's not what we're doing. So whatever the iPad Air, I can't even say it, whatever the iPad Pro is going to turn out to be, I don't think it's going to be one of those hybrids.
Yeah, I love the little road sign that he had, showing that was perfect, and that was
awesome.
That's what it feels like. It feels like Apple does have a strategy. Agree with it, don't agree with it. Applies to you, doesn't apply to you. They have a strategy, and they're sticking with it.
Right. I mean, the way I was thinking about it, just afterwards, is that really it seems that Apple is doubling down on this whole concept of mobility, and they're now maybe giving some reason for iCloud and their data center. Everything's automatically sharing between devices. We saw them dip their toe in the water with previous releases of Lion, but now that they're upgrading both the iLife and iWork apps, and in iWork, they're facilitating collaboration, even if one of the parties doesn't have iWork installed. It's clear that they're really trying to focus on. I think what for them was an old announcement when they launched iCloud a couple of years ago, that it's not the computer that's the hub of your life anymore. It's now the iCloud, and it's taken them a while, I think, to mature enough of the different parts of their products. But it seems that that's the area of that they're focusing on, and the nature of competition, I think, going forward is going to be the iCloud-based ecosystems. We'll still have to see if it works, because since upgrading to iOS 7 a couple weeks ago, I swear that I have about 60% of the times tried to use something with Siri and it just doesn't work. Things that used to be rock solid, like Siri set an alarm for 5 minutes, it spins and spins and spins and comes back with that famous, I really hate to say it, but I can't take requests, try again in a little while. And their reliability, I think, is just taken a big step backwards. So, they're betting, they're taking risks, but they have a lot of work to do if they're going to actually make that vision a reality.
That said, and I've had some of those problems, not as often as yours seem to be having them. I think it's also clear from all this that iCloud is a keeper. After .Mac and MobileMe and Apple keeping on changing how their cloud service is working, this iCloud is going to stick. They're not going to announce that they're discontinuing iCloud in favor of some other newer thing anytime. So this is it. And either it works or Apple's going to go down the ship with it.
Agreed. So, and I have to say, my experience has been just the opposite of yours with Siri. I feel like it's gotten more solid, more reliable than it has been. But Jeff, I want to turn to you. We have the chip, we have lighter, we have thinner, we have the better camera. Is this enough for us to upgrade from a version, an iPad 3 or iPad 4?
I'm going to go with yes. And how about if I temper that by saying, for me, it's definitely worth the upgrade. A lighter weight version of the iPad. We're talking about from mine, the 3rd gen model, to now losing almost half a pound of weight off this thing. And this is something that I carry around everywhere. The faster processor and the better video, I'm assuming as art app developers update their programs, that I will start to see better performance when I'm drawing and painting on my iPad. And just the idea of having something that weighs less gives me more horsepower than some of the laptops that I've owned over the past few years is very compelling. If I had the 4th generation model, I'd be less inclined to say, yes, I'm going to upgrade, not because of the features, but because I would have just bought a new iPad a year ago.
Jeff, question. Today, did Apple say anything about upgrading the camera in the iPad Air?
And with everything that was announced today, I'm totally drawing a blank right now.
I believe they did, because I can remember him going over the specs for the camera as if it was an upgrade, but I can't recall exactly what the upgrade is. I think it's still 5 megapixel, but I'm not sure what they might have changed.
But like an improved sensor?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
There was something about that. I thought it was the new HD camera with 8, but don't hold me to it. We'd have to go back and see.
Okay, yeah, I honestly don't know, but I will. In reply to Jeff, I'll take the opposite tack just for fun. I would say no, it's not worth it, but it'll be a tempered no. If you are the sort of person who is considering going from a full-size iPad to an iPad mini because you like the idea of it being smaller and especially like the idea of it being lighter, then I would say, but you sort of like the larger iPad and you were hesitant to give it up, I would say now is a good time to consider getting the new iPad Air, because you can keep your full-size iPad and get the weight down to the point that it's only 0.3 of a pound more than an iPad mini. I mean, that's the difference right now. The iPad Mini is like 0.7 pounds, and the iPad Air is 1 pound. So yeah, if that was important to you, and especially like if you had a 3rd generation and you wanted to go to the lightning connector, that would be it would be a good move. But aside from that, there really aren't any new features. If you get past the weight and the thinness and the speed, which is significant, as Jeff said, but there isn't anything you can do right now with a new iPad that you couldn't do with the one that you're holding in your hands from last year. And for a lot of people who use the iPad primarily just for surfing the web and email and stuff like that, and playing games, I certainly a 4th generation and probably a 3rd generation iPad is still going to be good enough for them, and to spend another $700-800 to get a new one, if you don't get the 16 gigabyte one, if you move up a little bit, and to spend that much money for a new one at this point, I think for a lot of people won't be worth it.
I agree with you on that, Ted. I think that really we're seeing that the changes from generation to generation, are not as substantial as if you go every other generation. So I think my sense of the charts that they were showing of all the speed improvements, I think Apple is targeting people who own iPad 3s or iPad 2s and basically sending the message, hey, it's time to upgrade. This is going so much faster. It's going to be so much better. You have some people who love to live on the edge, and they'll spend all sorts of money, to get the latest and greatest. But I don't think that's essential.
I agree that faster is always better. Newer is always better. I think the potential upgrader has to really look hard at what they're doing with their iPad. If you're using it as a production device, absolutely, then this is worth it. If you're using it primarily as a consumption device, you may want to think about waiting for whatever the yet next generation is, And a lot of people seem to be really enamored with the iPad mini. So it may be time to take the iPad mini version of the upgrade and maybe alternate back and forth.
The upgrade an iPad is significantly different from upgrading an iPhone because of the subsidy difference. You can get a new iPhone that would normally cost you $600-700 for $200 if you agree to the 2-year subsidy. But there is no subsidy for the iPad. So when you're thinking of upgrading to a new iPad, it's a significant amount of dollars, and I think people will be more hesitant than getting a new iPhone.
But you aren't signing any contracts either.
That's true.
That's the other part. That's the other part.
That's a good point.
But most people, I don't think, really care too much about signing a contract because they intend to they intend to use a phone for the next 2 years. It's just a question of which one. So unless they're thinking of switching carriers, then signing the 2-year contract doesn't matter much.
Yeah. I made the mistake when I got my iPad mini of not getting one with any of the carrier hardware. So I was restricted to, Wi-Fi. And I really discovered very quickly that was a mistake. That, even if you buy it with the hardware and then no contract, turn it on, when you need it, but it really does hinder it when you want to use it for certain things. Well, guys, let's move on to the MacBook Pros, because that was another thing I'm kind of interested in. The new Haswell chip, of course, with the Haswells, the big selling point there seems to be typically the battery life. I don't know how much more horsepower it delivers. I asked that on Twitter this afternoon, and I got back someone who said they thought it was around 20%, which would be a nice power boost, speed boost, if it holds true. Anybody have any intelligence on that?
Not me.
I haven't done any math yet.
Okay.
And to be fair, I've been sitting at my desk for almost 12 hours straight now, so math is probably not the avenue you guys want me going down right now.
I will say I have a MacBook Pro Retina display 13-inch, and the battery life on that is fantastic already. So you can't have too much battery life, I suppose, just like you can't have a computer that's too fast. But I certainly don't feel like I am itching to have something that has better battery life than it already has. So, I can get on an airplane that's a 4 or 5 hour flight and use my MacBook Pro as often as I want to use it on that flight and not have anywhere close to any danger of running out of battery power.
Yeah, so I think the new MacBook Pros, I think, will be tremendously faster for not so much because of a faster processor, although that may help with certainly with battery life. But the fact that they've upgraded it to a PCI SSD, which is dramatically faster than eSATA or SATA-based SSD cards. Also they've given it a memory bump, so it's 1600. Megahertz, DDR3. I think it was 1333 before. So, the combination of those two is going to be a big boost. I think people can see analogies from that in terms of what the MacBook Airs were doing. It just was endless source of amusement to me. When I guess they were first coming out with SSD a couple years, when was that, in 2010, in fall or winter of that year? They had a slower processor, was 1.8 something gigahertz instead of 2.4, and all the pundits were running around their hair as if their hair were on fire. That this is absolutely horrible. Apple's taking a step backward, not realizing that because they had an SSD, the bottleneck, limiting performance there was bandwidth, to memory, to a disk. So even with a faster, slower processor and a faster disk, everything picked up. So we're seeing the thing here now that there's a combination. They're upgrading the processor's capability. They're updating dramatically the SSD and also making the RAM faster.
And the new way that they're going to distribute between the graphics processor and the central processor, I think, may help as well. So,
right. I think it'll be interesting to see, if certainly I think their Aperture is probably using that. It'll be interesting to see if it gets parried and countered by Adobe, because they're in the graphic acceleration race, and I'm sure Jeff knows way more about this than I do. They're Adobe has their so-called CUDA standards in the card, and Apple has OpenCL, and they're a little bit like cats and dogs, and Republicans and Democrats not quite agreeing on what direction they should take to go forward.
I'd say it's more like cats and dogs than Republicans and Democrats, because at least with cats and dogs, there's a hope that they can work it out and get along.
Okay.
This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter for MacVoices viewers and listeners. Short, sweet, and to the point, the MacVoices Dispatch keeps you up to date with all of what's going on with me and with MacVoices. It also includes behind-the-scenes information, advance notices on show news, and the opportunity to provide feedback on the present and future of MacVoices, make show suggestions, and more. The Dispatch has recently been revamped, so you no longer have to download it as an attachment, but can read it inline in any email program on your Mac or iDevice. Signing up is simple. Just go to the MacVoices site, type your email address in the box, and hit subscribe. There have been many changes to MacVoices over the past few months, and more to come. Be sure you're among the first to learn about them by subscribing to the MacVoices Dispatch.
Okay, I'll probably end up going down a rat hole here, but yeah, it's kind of how I roll. All right, so when I start looking at like the whole graphics thing, my feeling is that ultimately we'll see more of a standardization of what Apple's doing, because the same thing is, generally speaking, happening on the PC side. And then the Adobe thing, Adobe will have their stuff, and they will just write their little patches that allow it to use whatever system everyone else is using, because that's kind of how a lot of the Adobe stuff ends up working out. And see, I totally went down the wrong path on that. But there you go.
Jeff, to do a follow-up question, what do you think the significance is of Apple giving Mavericks away for free, giving away iLife, and iWork for iLife was for the past couple of years was free with purchase of a new Mac, but now they're giving away iWork for free. What does this mean?
Okay, let's start with Mavericks. I was shocked that Apple decided to give it away for free, and I knew it was always a possibility because the price point that Apple had told me that they didn't need to charge for it. And by actually going ahead and doing that, well, Apple clearly has a master plan and they know what they're doing. So sometimes I just kind of have to trust that this was the right move. My feeling, though, is that by switching to a free model for the operating system as opposed to charging $19.99, is that Apple took away the perceived value. And now the maybe that's exactly what they wanted. They took away the perceived value of the operating system. Holy crap. Now that means that people will no longer ultimately see any value in Microsoft Windows.
Right, exactly.
Well, that only took me all day to realize. So that was a very clever move, because Microsoft has this incredibly complex and in many cases very expensive operating system structure. And Apple has OS X and it's free.
Yeah.
And that's it. And the only paid part would be for the server, which is what, $20, I believe.
So I don't know. Actually, that's a good question to dig in to see if OS 10 server is free or if it still has a $20 upgrade.
Yeah, I'd add, the operating system for Macs was free for a long time when the Mac came out.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, at least for a decade, from 84 to maybe around 94, something like that. Whenever a new version of the operating system came out, it was free. And
wasn't it iOS 8 when they started charging?
Yeah, I believe so. And I think around that time, there were a couple of things that came into play. One was that the clones were out for a while at one point, and Apple, I think, correctly decided it needed to charge for an operating system. If you weren't going to buy their hardware, they had to make some money somewhere. And so it made sense to charge for an operating system if you were going to have clone support. And also, I think they were competing head-to-head with Windows, and I think there was just some concern about whether they should have the Mac operating system be perceived on an equal footing with Windows, where Microsoft charges for Windows, we're going to charge for our OS as well. It's just as good a value, and they got significant money from it. I think things have gone in a different direction. Apple is no longer looking at Windows as its major competitor. They're much more into the mobile space, and in the mobile space, iOS has been free from the beginning. No one has ever had to pay for an iOS upgrade since the iPhone came out, and I think they're beginning to look at the adoption rates of those devices. Where what do they say? Like something like 60% of iPhone owners are using iOS 7 already, or something, or more than that. It's an incredible adoption rate, and I think they're looking at, is it really worth the money that we're getting for Mac OS 10 updates to slow down the adoption rate and generally allow us to make sure that the iPhones and iOS devices and Macs are all equally compatible as fast as possible. And I think that, in addition to what Jeff's saying, I think that's part of the thinking as well.
I would observe that it's ultimately a very vital competitive threat against Microsoft, because, as Jeff was saying, holy crap, there's no value in Windows 8.x, but by focusing on, they made a point again today, and they showed the slide, of they've been coming out with one OS release per year. Some of the Windows folks I talked to, they're thinking something now and then probably nothing until the spring of 2015. So they're certainly raising the competitive barrier and making Mac devices more and more attractive. But again, I think it's really part of this whole post-PC vision of you'll have multiple devices that you'll have overlapping uses. You may edit something in Pages on your Mac or on your phone or on your iPad, depending on where you are and how much editing, et cetera, you need to do. But they're making it all part of the environment, and it just raises the value of the totality of the Apple ecosystem.
Okay, so Ted, when you said, you remember back when the Mac OS was free, you totally hit on something for me that I'd forgotten about. It used to be, back in the old days, back in the 80s, when you bought a Mac, it came with all the software you needed. It was just bundled. You didn't have to actually go buy any other applications unless you had a very specialized application you needed. And what Apple did today was they just took us back to those days when you buy a Mac and every application you could possibly need, unless you're doing something very specialized, comes bundled with your computer, because you get the iLife suite, you get the iWorks suite, and that's free, and you get your operating system for free.
Which includes Safari and Mail and Contacts and all sorts of other things as well.
Right, yeah. So for the majority of people, they can go buy a Mac or an iOS device now, walk out the store, and they have every application they could possibly need. They have a fully functional system that it's not like the days when you'd buy a computer, you turn it on, and it's like, well, now what can I do with it? Now you can do everything with it.
And this is a direct shot at Microsoft, I think, in software as a service, the way they're trying to get more money out of Microsoft Office by doing the online subscription model. I'm curious, though, because I saw some developers tweeting today that this really devalues their software. And I haven't talked to them, but I guess I look at it exactly the other way. It doesn't devalue it. It does raise the bar on what they produce, but they have the opportunity now to improve on that, to take iMovie and do, and I'm going to say for the iPad, and do an iMovie Pro, or take Contacts and do Contacts Pro, or Calendar and do Busy Cal for the Mac, as we all know it. A lot of ways here that I think there are opportunities for them. So I don't think that it devalues things at all, but I think it does change the game quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the whole software experience has changed dramatically over decades. I mean, I remember a decade or two ago, again, if I can go back in time before everything was on the web, that I'd get a new Mac and I'd get out my latest Mac Connection or Mac Warehouse catalog, and it would be chock full of software. And I'd be thinking, do I want this or do I want that? Or I'd go down to the local computer store, which had shelves and shelves of boxes of Mac software. If it was one that carried Mac software, a lot of them didn't. And I'd browse through that, and now that's all gone. Now, after, similar to what Jeff is saying, after I get a Mac, there's some software that I want. I download it from the internet, and that's it. And maybe there might be a half a dozen things over the course of a year that I'd even worry about, maybe less. And so, for the Mac, I think software developers are in some degree of trouble unless you have a product. There are a few products that have carved out a niche for themselves, like Text Expander or something like that, and that will continue to get support. But I think coming out with an all-new Mac product, unless it's a utility that does something, is really hard these days.
I have to say, the other thing I wanted to make sure we touched on too, I think, Mark, you were the one who said Microsoft brought out their Surfaces today, the new Surfaces. There were a bunch of things, and the morning news had declared today Tablet War Tuesday or something like that. And it's like, yeah, I know. And I mean, I know I didn't pay that much attention. In fact, I'd honestly forgotten about it because there was just such a deluge of Apple information. I realize this is a biased perspective kind of thing, but still, did they capture anybody's imagination, you think?
You mean Microsoft?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell. Just looking a little bit just on the news, it doesn't seem that there's much news headline. We'll have to see. Well, I don't watch TV news, so don't know. But we'll have to see what comes up in the next day or two in terms of stories and coverage. But I think unfortunately Microsoft is a little bit like a boxer that's in the corner of the ring and his hands are up. Don't hit me, don't hit me. They're committed to this, to trying to be in the tablet business. I mean, we've had on a prior show or a MacJury, we talked about some of the challenges they have of, their core business is declining. They are nowhere in mobile. So what do you do? Go into the hardware business, because that can, as tiny as the hardware margins may be, they're incremental to them, so it's a way for them to grow. But they tried it with their Surface RT and Surface Pro and didn't work, and so now they have the Surface 2, which is the new replacement for the Surface RT, and they have the Surface Pro 2. So they have continued a confused mess. I don't know what the battery life is of these things, in terms of key for making a desirability. I imagine that some diehard Windows fans will like them and use them. But more broadly based, I don't see that they're going to really be that successful in launching into the general market, because I think they're defeatured, right? They came out and said, what was it? They have 450,000 native iPad apps. How many exist, for Surface, outside of, the key Microsoft productivity suite. So, I think if you want something where you have a keyboard as an option that Microsoft blesses, as suitable for running Windows on, I think Surface is it. But I think for the rest of the world, who doesn't really particularly care about Office Suite, and for whom Microsoft, by absence of doing a port onto the iPad for 3 years, many people have been trained that you don't need it in order to write on a Mac. So, yes, Microsoft is still in there. Their corporate DNA seems to be launch something, even if it's not right, try harder and come back again and again and again. But unlike that, Ali Rumble in the Jungle, I don't think they're going to emerge victorious. They're not Muhammad Ali in this boxing match. I think their new CEO is going to have some really hard decisions, and I think a very declined, smaller market, in order to that they're going to have to deal and play in.
I was going to just reinforce on what you were saying in that the Microsoft strategy of come out with the wrong thing and keep trying has worked for it in years past. It worked. It worked when Netscape was the popular browser, and they came out with the first version of Internet Explorer, and it wasn't all that great, and they just kept plugging away until eventually Netscape was the loser. And the same thing with Windows. Windows 3 was never going to compete with the Mac. It took until they got to Windows 95 before they had a compelling product, and they could afford to do that. It didn't matter if they failed the first 3 or 4 times because they were in such a dominant position that people would take their failed product pretty much anyway, and then they could wait for the really good one and then stomp the competition. Clearly, that hasn't worked. It didn't work for the Zune when they tried to compete with an iPod, and it hasn't worked so far with tablets. And it's a new world for them. And if they think that strategy is going to somehow be resurrected, I think they're wrong.
I would agree, because some of the things you're mentioning, they were giving away for free. Their browser, notoriously, they gave away for free. They gave away Outlook for free. Their OSs used to be very inexpensive until they got a little bit more market share, and then they're key to increase profits in the late 90s and early 2000 was basically to double or more the cost of the license for their OS. Beyond that, they haven't really. Actually, if I were to say it differently, I feel sorry for Microsoft right now because they don't have a good software company that they can copy and learn from. And the problem with coming out with hardware devices, there is real hard cost to it. And so I think that explains maybe why the Zune really made a thud, and why on the Surface RT and Surface Pro, they had that $1 billion write-down 1 quarter ago.
And Mark, I love that point. The company that they typically have copied from just announced that they're going to give their software for free. So you're going to copy it and charge for it? I don't think so. Guys, before we run out of time, I want to make sure that we do touch on the other elephant in the room, and that is the new Mac Pro. I don't know that we saw that much more today new as far as specs and all, but we did finally see the price. Reaction to $29.99? Is it for a base model?
I'll start. Yeah, I think it's pretty good for what you're getting. This is an expensive piece of hardware. It's not meant to be sold to your grandmother, and I think it's okay. I'll make 2 quick comments about it. This is probably the longest delay in coming out with a hardware that Apple has ever had. It started with an email message from Tim Cook back in 2012, in which he said that something to replace the existing Mac Pro would be coming sometime the following year, and then it gets announced at WWDC. And shown there, but with no release date. Now it gets announced again at this time with a projected release date of December. So I can't recall Apple ever doing something that took that long. But I guess they can afford to do that because it's not their most competitive market. This is not where they're going to be making most of their revenue. And so if they have to delay for a while, I guess it's okay. Beyond that, I'd say it looks like a screaming amazing machine. I have currently a 2009 Mac Pro, and I've contemplated whether this is the time to upgrade to it. And I'm thinking I will wait for 2 reasons. One is I think I'll just wait for the 2nd or 3rd version of it to come out because I'm in no particular hurry. My Mac Pro is still functioning okay. And I'm a little bit reluctant to want to give up on the dual optical drives and 4 internal hard drives and bays and stuff like that I have in my Mac Pro, to go for something that's going to require that I have an additional bay of peripherals in order to duplicate those sort of things. So, but I imagine there's a new Mac Pro in my future. It looks like an amazing machine. So, yeah.
Jeff, how about you?
I think we're going to see people flipping over the price. And it's because it will get compared to crappy beige box PCs, which is not a fair comparison because this is a professional machine, and that's clearly the market Apple is going for with this. And for what it offers, I would be very surprised if you could custom build a machine that offers the same features, the same specs at this price. So I'm with Ted. I think it's a good price for what it is. It is an expensive machine though, but it's for people that need to pay that kind of money to have that kind of horsepower.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in there. I think that you really need to pay attention to Mac Pro. It's not a consumer machine. It's not a prosumer machine. This is a pro machine. It has pro level power. It has surprisingly affordable pro level pricing, and because I think they could have justified spending or charging, a lot more for it, but they didn't. Didn't. They also did not, at least to my eye, they did not make it so crippled that even bought at a stock configuration, you can't do stuff with it. You can do a whole lot with that machine.
Yeah, I think in terms of what you're saying, Chuck, that I think people may be a little bit misled by the MacBook Pro, which is nowhere near what this Mac Pro is like. The difference between, would a non-professional want a MacBook Pro? Sure, lots of them would and do. But there are going to be very few people that need the computing power that this machine has. And either you're going to be, a nut like me that just wants to get it because I can and it's fun, or you're going to really need it. And that's a small market, and that market can pay this price. And like Jeff says, I think you would be hard pressed to deliver all that machine is delivering at anything less.
Yeah, while the market for it may be small, it's vitally important. I know video production companies on both coasts, and one of them is sort of leaking and buying some high-end HP workstation product and running Adobe on it. The other one is buying the same hardware and building so-called Hackintosh. They're getting the drivers and they're putting OS 10 on it, and both of them, these are signs of desperation. If they just need more and more performance, and it's been available in the Windows world, but not from Apple. So I think really the reason they're pre-announcing it is to stave off defections of other people thinking, okay, well, Apple has abandoned this market. Let me go buy other software and run it on a box made by HP. They're really going out there and trying to freeze all those purchases by pre-announcing and giving a lot of information. And they said it's in December, so it's October, so it's 2.5 months or so away. So that's probably a reasonable time for people to finish up their projects and then enter 2014 with a nice, fast, killer machine.
Yeah, I think it'll be the beginning of December. I don't think they're going to release a product on Christmas Day or something like that. So, yeah.
And still be able to sneak it into the 2013 budget expenditures.
Right.
No small consideration. Last thing, guys, the software. We saw a lot of stuff given away for free, but we did see definitely a mention of a new Final Cut X version that will tap the power of this machine. On Twitter, I saw someone that said they thought they heard, and I missed it, a new or enhanced version of Aperture. Did anybody else see that?
I saw tweets about that, yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's coming up, but this felt like Apple at its very best. They upgraded almost the entire product line. They did it, in a very calm fashion. There were not a lot of rah-rah. I was really struck by the fact that everybody sort of marched along. They could have dragged this out for 3 or 4 hours, and they didn't. They just hit the high points of each thing, moved on, and said thank you very much.
Well, they all saw that HP keynote or media event from a couple years ago, where partway through, journalists and bloggers that were in there started tweeting about send food, send airlift, get us out of here.
Send air.
HP event day 3. And Apple's not going to do that.
I'm not a professional musician by any means, but I keep being impressed with how much power Apple puts into GarageBand. It seems to me that a lot of professional magicians, a lot of professional magicians and musicians both, could get by with GarageBand and wouldn't need something like Logic. But I could be wrong. So, but I was impressed with the new features today, and I've always been impressed with that product.
And we keep saying it, and they're basically giving it away. I mean,
Right.
that's the part that just blows you away. If that doesn't motivate a parent to buy a Mac for their musically inclined child, I don't know what could possibly be a better motivation.
But Ted, Chuck, I want to qualify or correct what you said. You said they're basically giving GarageBand away. No, they are giving GarageBand away. If you go to the Mac App Store or to the App Store and you look up GarageBand, the little tag just says free.
Also, it's not, I missed that, Jeff. Thank you. It's not with new purchase or anything like the iLife suite.
Yeah, it's just free.
Yeah, it's just free.
Wow. Just free only on a Mac.
Mm-hmm.
What more do you
There
need?
you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you pay Apple for it one way or the other. The question is just how they run their books, how they account for it, and certainly just put continued pressure to gain market share. I think they have to do things like this, right? Because if you do believe that sort of the prognostication that PCs contracted another 8% in Q3. What is Apple going to do? Just defend the Mac. Because even though it's only got maybe 12% of the market, it's still in a market that has severe downward pressure. So they need to do things to make it more attractive and make it higher value than other boxes out there. And that's what they're doing by upgrading the apps and giving them away for free, or bundling them in with the purchase of a Mac.
And I think making the iWork apps essentially free when you buy a new Mac is a good move in that direction as well. Because I've had lots of conversations with people that will call me and they say, "Well, I just got a new Mac, and do I need to buy Microsoft Office?" And I would say, "Well, it depends. If you need Word, for what you do, then yeah, maybe you do. But I think you could get Pages for a lot less money. You get the whole iWork suite for a lot less money, and it could be everything you need, and in some ways better." And then people will invariably say that they had not even been aware that Pages existed just about as an option. And so there's a large segment of the Mac community that doesn't realize what good products Pages, Keynote, and Numbers are, and that for many people that don't need 100% Office compatibility, it's more than good enough. And I think by giving them away, that's going to encourage that to change.
So last question of the evening, going around the room, who's going to put what on their shopping list first? Jeff?
iPad Air. That's right at the top of my list.
Interesting. Mark?
Oh, I've already spent my Apple budget for the year. Less than a month ago, I upgraded to a new, fast 13-inch MacBook Air, with faster SSD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'll gladly invest and buy all the new software, and probably think next year looking at probably the iPad Mini will be the next thing, because I have an iPad and it's great, but something a little bit lighter and more particularly a little bit smaller, I think would hit the spot. And if it's Retina display, it gets the same high quality images. I think that's going to be a killer product.
Ted?
I'm still on the fence a little bit. It's going to be an iPad. That's the hardware we're talking about. I had decided before this event was announced that if Apple came out with a Retina display iPad Mini, that's what I would get. I wouldn't get the MacBook. The iPad Air. But the iPad Air is so much thinner and lighter than I expected it to be that I'm thinking, well, maybe I can just stick with the larger one. That I'll still be happy with that. So I'll have to wait and see.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Nobody's going for the MacBook Pro.
No, I don't need a new MacBook at all. I got the MacBook Pro with Retina display last December, I think, and I'm not ready to get rid of that yet.
Jeff, what's your working machine? Is it a desktop iMac or is it a laptop?
I don't have a desktop machine at all. I work from I'm actually working from 3 different laptops, depending on what I'm doing. I know, my first world problems. I'm using, as my main machine right now, first generation Thunderbolt MacBook Pro that I've done all kinds of upgrades on. And then I do have a Retina MacBook Pro that I use when I need to. Well, I use that for a lot of art related stuff. And then I have a MacBook Air, one of the Thunderbolt MacBook Airs, that I use a lot when I'm traveling too.
Interesting. Well, guys, thank you so much for the time. We've pretty much run our limit, but I really appreciate it, and the insights are. I've got to go back and think about some of the insights.
Maybe they're not good after all.
No, if anything, I sort of missed them. I'm like Jeff. It took me until Mark said it. I really hadn't thought about the devaluing of Windows and therefore the valuing of the OS as a whole package. So that's going to take a little while to think about it and see the repercussions. Jeff Gamet, Mark Fuccio, Ted Landau, thanks for serving on this edition of the MacJury.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for asking me.
It's always a blast.
Take care. Good to be here.
Folks, I will have links in the show notes to everything we talked about, definitely to Apple's keynote, and of course to everything that our panelists do when they're not serving here on the MacJury, because you want to go and get to know each and every one of them. Until the next time, the verdict is in. I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and for more Apple, Mac, and tech-related shows, including MacVoices, Mac Notables, the MacJury, and the MacVoices Briefing. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.